Hey there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I had a thought this morning, and so I wanted to kind of put some thoughts into words and just see where that went and where that led us, and hopefully it leads us to a good place. But essentially, as I'm putting together some more face stuff and another 5,000 subscriber special thank you video, I wanted to kind of think about remakes and ports again. Now, I'll get to that. I'll get to why I'm thinking about it in a minute. But this one, Genealogy fans, this one is for you. This video is basically talking about the likeliness and possibility of a Genealogy remake from Nintendo. And will it happen? Will it not happen? When will it happen? We'll speculate. So, let's talk about Fire Emblem ports or remakes. They're kind of the same thing. For the purpose of this video, anyway, they're pretty much the same thing. So back in November, I don't know if you recall, but there was some buzzing about a canceled Fire Emblem remake for the Nintendo 3DS. So it was during an interview with Imran Khan by Greg Miller of the Kinda Funny podcast. Khan was basically talking about the success of the Switch Lite, potentially leading to more 3DS remake titles coming to the Switch in that fashion. And I feel like the crossover between those two platforms is pretty high. More than likely, if you like the 3DS, you're going to like the Switch Lite, or just the Switch in general, if you can find one. That's with a huge asterisk, because I think scalping them on like eBay and places like that, you could probably get them for like $500 or $600, which is way over MSRP. So just wait until a real one comes. Just wait until one comes back in stock for legit purposes. So the idea of bringing remakes in isn't crazy, I guess. If you remember, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was basically just a Wii U port that happened like at launch, basically, when the Switch came out. Like, that was one of the titles that they had. I think they did the same with Pokken Tournament as well. Link's Awakening is a recent one that did pretty darn well. It sold over 3 million copies in just 11 days, which is insane. That one less of a port, more of a remake as compared to like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But they've been doing that for Wii U games, so it's not crazy to think that the 3DS and Wii U, that same generation, wouldn't have the same kind of portability potential. So it turns out that, you know, Nintendo ended up scrapping these potentially 3DS remake titles from previous systems because of the failed. I literally wrote this down. I have notes that I'm reading from. I had to write out this whole thing because the name is so long. Mario plus Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, which is like a remake slash reimagination slash enhanced version of Bowser's Inside Story from, I think it was on the Nintendo DS. Maybe it did not do so well because of the ridiculously long name. We'll never really know, but sales were not hyped. So because of this, evidently they scrapped a bunch of potential ports or remakes that were planned to be on the 3DS, but this, kind of soured the field for that. In that same interview, Khan was talking about how a Fire Emblem remake, he had heard that the Fire Emblem remake was among those canceled games. It's not crazy to think that there were more Fire Emblem games. This is, of course, one of those examples is basically Shadows of Valentia. If you've heard of it, that's a game that was remade from a very old console that Nintendo had, Gaiden, Fire Emblem Gaiden, for the 3DS. I don't know what it is, but not a lot of people are familiar with that game. So since they'd done it before, it wouldn't be crazy to think that they would do it again. I personally, back then, granted, I think maybe Binding Blade or Sacred Stones remake, maybe the Tellius games, that's a possibility too. Those maybe would have been more likely given who the general audience for the 3DS was geared at that time. So if you're not familiar, back when the Switch launched, Nintendo kind of came out and made a statement that the 3DS is going to be our 10 and under focus for games, and then the Switch is going to be for adult/general audience games. And to be fair, that's pretty much what it's held true to so far. We've seen a lot more mature games on the Switch. We've seen a lot more third party on the Switch. We've seen a lot more cross compatibility on the Switch. It is just kind of like a Swiss Army knife for gaming consoles at this point. It's not just Nintendo IPs, which a lot of the time previous Nintendo consoles had been kind of locked behind that publisher identification. So that much has kind of been true. And if they were gearing away from, late teens to adults, which I feel like is kind of who Fire Emblem is more geared towards, it would make sense that they would definitely scrap that, let alone the fear of poor sales kind of impacting that. So relating to Genealogy, I'm sorry friends, for reasons that I won't spoil, I feel like the general story of Genealogy maybe has some circumstances that were not appropriate for the general audience of 10 and under, which is more than likely why it probably wouldn't have been considered for a remake at that time. Unfortunately, the remake that they did put out for the 3DS did not do so well. I've got a chart up at the right here showing sales for basically every Fire Emblem game up until December of 2019, which is why you'll see that Tokyo Mirage Sessions for the Wii U is there, but the one for the Switch is not. Which, by the way, is another port of Fire Emblem that is on the Switch now. Technically, it's a Fire Emblem game. Just throwing it out there. It is technically a Fire Emblem game. But you can see some of the numbers here, and these are in tens of thousands of units. All relatively pretty steady until Thracia, which got a little curious. But again, that was kind of towards the end of the SNES. Yes, it's called the SNES, not the SNES. I don't like it any more than you do. Trust me, it's irritating and I hate it. But that's what it's called. It did relatively well up until that point, and I feel like that's maybe because, not that Thracia is a bad game, it's towards the end of the life cycle of that console. Maybe that's part of the problem. Again, we've got the GBA games. Those all did relatively pretty well. And then we have the Tellius series, which is a bit scary. That maybe didn't go over so well. But again, maybe console has something to do with that. I don't think the games are bad. Tellius is some of my favorite in the series. I think maybe it has more to do with the fact that it was on a home console rather than a handheld, portable. So, and to this point, the last 3 Fire Emblem games, it all did pretty well. Enough for them to start being localized anyway, outside of Japan. Maybe that was part of the problem. Shadow Dragon comes along. That sold about what the Game Boy Advance games have been doing. Mystery of the Emblem also kind of hanging in there as well. And at this point, I don't think that Shadow Dragon did well enough. And Awakenings was, Here Tale, supposed to be the last game in the series, which is why if you play Awakening, it's pretty beloved and is kind of like a love letter to all of these little hidden references to Fire Emblem as a whole. One of the reasons I like the game so much. But Awakening came in and crushed it, and then Fates came in and crushed it again, and then again, once we get towards the end of this life cycle, where we're kind of phasing out, we don't have this hard cutoff like we do between the Game Boy Advance games and maybe even the DS for that reason. We have Valentia not doing well. I mean, it is a mere fraction of the total volume right there. It is just very, very poor. And then Three Houses comes back. We're on the Switch, which is great for any game, honestly. Anything on the Switch usually sells pretty well. I think that's just a part of being a Nintendo Switch game at this point. You know, comes in and crushes it again, and it's up there with those numbers of Awakening and Fates. Why did Valentia do so poorly? I don't know. I think maybe it had something to do with it wasn't as similar to Fates and Awakening. It was more of a classic traditionalist kind of Fire Emblem game. Again, the life cycle, maybe what Thracia was dealing with in terms of SNES. Maybe it was just towards the end of that cycle. Who knows? A lot could have factored in with that, but the fact is that it did not sell well at all. Comparatively to the last couple years that Fire Emblem had been doing. And of course, now we're back with Three Houses, kind of putting the series, or the franchise rather, the best that it has relatively ever been. I don't know. But you can definitely tell that Shadows of Valentia is a very stark contrast to the other 3DS titles. The numbers, you know, they probably didn't help Nintendo decide to try and put out another port. They probably looked at that and were like, well, the first Fire Emblem remake we did was not well received. Didn't do a whole lot in sales. I don't think we want to do another one. Especially with all these other remakes not doing so well. Maybe we hold off. And so more than likely, it probably contributed to the lack of remakes being made. So, fun anecdote, actually. I was at a convention months ago, and I was standing in line to get my Mila cipher card signed by the voice actress who plays Mila in the English version. And I had Heroes on my phone, and the guy next to me started talking to me about Fire Emblem because he played Heroes, and he also played Three Houses, and he also played Fates. There's a game that came out between all of those that he had never heard of, and that was Shadows of Valentia, as we were in the line for someone who did voices in that game. Let that sink in for a second. I don't know if it was marketing or like did they not promote it enough? I don't know. But maybe it's not entirely on the game and the console itself. Maybe they did a bad job promoting it. I don't know. They beat it to death in Heroes. We had a lot of Valentian banners when that game came out, but I don't know. Anyway, case in point, that was that. You know, it's personal anecdote, not really factual evidence, but it is what it is. So all of that was months ago. Why am I bringing it up now? Why am I now deciding to talk about Fire Emblem ports when this little podcast snippet caught the ears of people back in November of last year? During the 30th anniversary, Famitsu magazine ran a poll that basically asked people in Japan, what is your favorite Fire Emblem game? Simple question, right? Well, they published the top 5 results. May have done more, but I only saw the top 5 because I don't have the magazine. But the top 5 results were Genealogy of the Holy War, Three Houses, Awakening, Blazing Blade, and Mystery of the Emblem, in that order. Now you look at the sales for those games, and you gotta wonder, one of these things isn't quite like the others, is it? I can understand why Blazing Blade was there. Awakening, obviously. Three Houses. Mystery of the Emblem. A classic remade. Arguably one of the better Marth version games. But Genealogy reigns supreme. Genealogy is easily one of, if not the most underrepresented games in Heroes, while being the most popular among fans in Japan. So, all of you Juggerl stands, I guess this is bragging rights for you. Go ahead and use this as ammunition for why there should be more Genealogy characters in Fae and why we should get ports and things like that. As I'm sure that, you know, people will kind of take a look at. Now, the thing to remember, of course, is this is just a single poll through a magazine, so take that for what you will. But Famitsu is kind of like, it's up there. I feel like poll results like this will get the attention of decision-making people in charge of remakes. You know what I mean? So, with that said, I think generally the more telling information comes from the other games listed, not just the fact that Genealogy is the most popular. Three Houses and Awakening are two of the top 3 selling games in the franchise, period. Three Houses is also, I think, the record holder for most sales at launch. So, following up, second and third behind Genealogy, I think that's pretty impressive. So along with the polling numbers, what might kind of spring hope for Genealogy Remake is that the Switch is, like I said towards the beginning of this video, much more capable of handling games with a more, shall we say, complicated or not so PG story. Like, I don't know how to... I'm not going to give it away. But, as I said, Genealogy has a very complex, slightly more mature situations and happenings that occur within the game. And that's no fault of its own. I understand that it is, very beloved and a good story, but again, I don't think that was meant for the 3DS, for the audience they were gearing it towards. The Switch, however, is very capable of handling that audience. Have you looked at some of the games that are on the Switch? Exactly. So, does that mean that we will see a Jugdral remake on the Switch in the future? We know that it has the console audience is prepared to handle it. It's clearly popular, as per, people that I hear from, which is, again, kind of anecdotal, but we have a poll from Famitsu, who pretty much blew the competition away. Faye could do some kind of promoting. It didn't really help that much when it came to Valentia. But again, Faye was pretty new back then, and not as many people were playing it then as they are now. So there's definitely a bigger reach that Heroes has to help promote games that come out, kind of like they did for Tokyo Mirage Sessions with that banner. It's possible. Like, there's a lot in place here. Not to mention, the franchise is in a pretty good spot because of Three Houses. Like, even on the off chance that people don't know about some of the older games, they're gonna know the name Fire Emblem at this point. And that's a good thing. So I think it's likely that we will see a Genealogy remake. However, I don't know that it's likely going to be on the Switch. The Switch is, as we kind of talked about when we were looking at the numbers, Switch is kind of nearing its life cycle end. We know that PlayStation and Xbox had their next-gen consoles out. I think it would be crazy if Nintendo wasn't, like, thinking, like, next-gen, like, what's the successor to the Switch? In fact, they may already be doing that because there was some data mined evidence from a previous update where there was some kind of coding for hardware to run software on the Switch, and it had something to do with the NX, which is the code name for the Nintendo Switch back when it was in development. So it was a variation of that. So it's likely that they have that in development. With the state of the world and everything that's going on right now, I don't know. But I'm sure that someone has looked at these numbers and has considered that when consoles are nearing their life cycle, and this isn't like new news or anything, games don't tend to sell as well because consumers are expecting the next game to come out. I mean, they put Breath of the Wild on the Wii U and the Switch. Did you even know that? No, you probably didn't. I own a copy. Fun fact, because I forgot to cancel the pre-order. So I have a sealed copy of Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, which I don't really know what I'm going to do with, but it's there. So I don't think they would do that for a remake. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I think they realize that, that has definitely something to do with game sales when it comes to that. And I don't think they want to lose money on a Fire Emblem game at this point, or give it a reason to fail. So I don't think it's going to be on the Switch. However, I think Nintendo's kind of steering towards that point where they like money. It's a good thing for them. And the Switch, with the breadth of games that they have on it, is doing very well and is very popular. So I think they're going to continue towards that trend of general audience for that. And I think that's where the Switch Lite comes in. And I think that's where this interview becomes more relevant, is the 3DS was succeeded by the Switch Lite. And that is important, because they can still have support for the Switch and the Switch Lite, but they can come out with a next-gen console to start making those current Switch games for that, and then keep a younger audience based on the Switch Lite, if they want to do that. And I think that's probably the direction that they'll be heading in. So if we do see a Genealogy remake, I think it's likely going to be on the next-gen console, and it's probably going to be about 5 years away, at most, or at least, rather. Because the way the world is, there's a lot of stuff that things have been pushed back on, and things have been delayed for titles, I mean, that we know about. I'm sure it's all hands on deck to get the stuff that's been announced out, not too far past the original promise date. Anything that's been secret or unannounced, which again is probably why Nintendo's not really talking too much about stuff. That's why there's been no Nintendo Directs. That's why they just announce a new Paper Mario game via Twitter. Like, that has something to do with it, and I think any kind of remake potential like this has just kind of been silenced. So, Genealogy remake could currently be in the planning stages. Who knows? They could be developing it on the Switch, and then, you know, they'll be able to port it over to the new console with some coding changes. Who knows? Who knows? But those are just some of my thoughts. And I gave you guys a full-on Genealogy background because I like you. And I'm sorry that you didn't get the Bride Banner. This is me feeling bad that you guys didn't get the Bride Banner you deserved. So, what do you think? Will we see more Fire Emblem remakes headed our way? What do you think we'll see, and what do you hope that we will see? Let me know in the comments down below. More Faye content that is coming out soon, I hope, as I go. 5 other 5K subscriber special video that's coming in the next couple weeks. Speaking of subscribe, maybe, if you feel so inclined. Ring bell for bonus points. Could be good for you. You never know. But that is it for me right now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your time on whatever day that it is. And that's all I got for now. So, hope to see you again. Thank you again for watching. And until then, I will catch you next time.